Okay, so this talk is going to be about ransomware. So, if you haven't heard about ransomware, you're going to hear a lot about its intricate workings. And what I have on the agenda is a really exciting thing. I've prepared some demos that are going to walk you through the attack lifecycle of a ransomware attack. We're going to talk about how the huge chunk is about the attack lifecycle and these demos, but we're also going to talk about what happens after the attack is successful. How do the victim organizations negotiate with the threat actors? And last but not the least, we're going to share the tips from the trenches. So I get to, a little bit about me, I get to lead the incident response engagements at Mandiant. And it's so much fun leading those because there's like a social engineering element, there's a technical element, there's like how to deal with the business element. So it's a lot of fun. And why me for this presentation? I've been doing this work for about 15 years, 10 years of ransomware threat actors tracking, all the way back to like 2012, 2013, when the ransomware didn't discriminate. It was one size fits all, like talking about CryptoLocker when everybody used to pay the same amount. Now, it's gotten a little more customized. So one other thing about my claim of fame for ransomware world, just about a few months ago, as Kevin was talking about earlier, right at the time that Kevin was speaking at the RSA stage, there's this threat actor that said, hey, we have Mandiant Zeta, false flag operation. But right after that, they also posted a note on dark web saying that me and some of my colleagues, we actually were involved in unacceptable practices. What was that unacceptable practice for them? We were able to stop ransomware attack. So they targeted us. It was about 10 of us. And they said, we'll pay 100 grand each if you are able to get some information on Jibran and his credentials and whatnot. So just imagine the amount of OTP requests I got that day and got signed up to a lot of things that I would rather not. So yeah, been in this world, and I can't wait to share the intricate details of a whole ransomware attack lifecycle. Right, so why should we understand ransomware? And not just ransomware as a topic, but like what all goes in the life cycle. So it hits home. We were just talking about with the Colonial Pipeline, Cesar, right, Adam, and he was telling us about like what happened when there was an attack on their organization. Gas was expensive, gas was not available, right? And number two is very close to my heart, the ransomware attacks on hospitals. I call these cyber criminals, this is the kind that I call heartless, because you hate to see a note on a hospital that you need to go or your parents need to go, saying that, hey, we can't do your surgery. I know we understand you're in pain, but we can't do your surgery because our computer systems are down. Now, I've seen these cyber criminals stoop down so low that on purpose, they've targeted surgery room systems so that they get their money fast. So it gets really, really personal, it gets really serious, and we at Mandiant, we take it as a mission to protect all organizations, especially the healthcare organizations, because we know lives are at stake. And then you've got the typical corporate networks down, and that's also a big impact. All right, so one thing to understand about the ransomware ecosystem is that it's becoming like a business, or it has been a business for a number of years. And the ransom amounts, like I was saying, back in 2012, 2013, it used to be just one size fits all. Now it's the attackers know, how financially strong the organization is, and they base their ransom amounts based on the organization. They actually even check income statements and financial statements before doing that. So we've seen the ransom amounts all the way from like hundreds of thousands to like $30 to $40 million range. And here's a funny thing that I've noticed. There's a point about ransomware payments are being facilitated by cyber insurance these days. So a lot of organizations do tend to pay because they buy insurance and then they pay with that. So one thing that I've noticed, like in 2 or 3 of my incident investigations that I was investigating, the attackers chose the ransom amount very, very close to the cyber insurance coverage they had. So any idea how they got to know about that? Yes, they were reading emails. So in one organization, I saw them ask for $14 million. I'm like, why 14? Why not 15? And I figured out like 3-4 days later that their whole coverage was $15 million. And so the threat actor, they wanted to leave the money on the table for us forensic experts and folks like Lisa Soto, who are the counsel. They say, you know what, between 1 million, they should be able to take care of forensics and external counsel. So we're going to ask for $14 million. So it's very customized. One of the biggest dangers is, with money you can get the data, but what if your threat actor is banned or is on a sanctions list by OFAC? Does anybody understand what OFAC is? So they're part of Department of Treasury. They can ban certain threat actors from getting the ransom. So yeah, then it gets really, really tricky. Okay, let's move on to the meat of the presentation. So we want to visualize the attack. So here's how it's going to go. I have a whole kill chain that I'm going to run through. There are some demos, but then for some of the concepts, I'm going to explain why I screenshots as well. And if you're a blue teamer or if you're enthusiastic about defense, some of the tools that I'm going to show, if you want to write those down and create signatures for those tools, that'll be pretty useful. So not everything is a malware per se. What attackers capitalize on is what we call living off the land binaries, like all the good executables that Windows places for ease, but they can be used maliciously. So if you want to take notes, so some are screenshots, some are demos, some I'll be just speaking verbally because there's a lot to cover. And again, if you're a blue teamer, those notes would really, really help you. Okay, so this is the kill chain on a high level. And I'm going to drill down on each of these, so I won't take so much time on this slide. But this is how the flow is going to be. There's infiltration, then they establish foothold, then they have to escalate privileges in the network. There's some more internal recons once they have privilege access in the network. And then they complete the mission by exfiltrating the data and then also by encrypting the data. All right. So what are some of the top infiltration tactics that we see? So one of the top and most basic ones is authenticating into the network via single-factor authentication. Very simple. I still get surprised every time I see it in 2022, people having remote access with single-factor authentication, yet it happens a lot. Even if they have a VPN with two-factor authentication for their primary means of remote access, you might see a Citrix on a company that they recently purchased, wasn't security aware, and sometimes there are just some rogue remote desktop ports open in organizations. That happens a lot. And passworded spray attack, like what are we in? We're in fall 2022, right? So you can almost bet, like on these single-factor organizations, you could try fall 2022 exclamation mark. Satisfies the compliance, with uppercase, lowercase, 2022 being the number and then exclamation being the complex character. You might get into a few accounts. Purchasing of credentials or dark web. That's a very common theme too. You might see a post on dark web saying that, hey, I have credentials for an airline based in Texas or this city in Texas. And you might go, oh my God, I know, I solved the puzzle. This is that organization. So they sell the credentials pretty cheap because there is a lot of the process, as you saw in the previous slide. It's not just about getting in. They have to keep making their way before they complete the mission. So they sell that access, and then Team 2 picks it up, and they actually go with the whole-blown ransomware attack. So the next thing, as Kevin was saying earlier, Kevin Mandiant, the exploitation is on the rise. We used to see a lot of spear phishing being the entry point, but now with so many of these zero-day vulnerabilities, even if you hear about a vulnerability, between the time you hear about it and the time you actually get to patch, there are a few hours. So what we see is when Log4j hits, and I take this one very personal because I was supposed to take Christmas off last year. I wasn't able to because of Log4j. You know, a lot of organizations are scrambling. And sometimes patch number 1 for something like LogJ might not be it, and you find out later. So between that time, what the attackers are doing is they're creating strong footholds in the organization. It may not be the attacker who's actually going to eventually conduct a ransomware attack, but you know, a team of threat actors, they just gather the credentials and they put it up for sale because that's easy money, right? You already have the proof of concept for exploit. You get in the organization, you establish a beachhead, and then you have access for a long time. Site-to-site VPNs, you know, the trust, we heard it in the supply chain context earlier, so that's also there. But we're going to demo email spear phishing attack, and it's one of the tactics that is pretty common in all kinds of attack, not just ransomware attack. So let's check the email first. Now, I have to confess, I've seen better crafted spear phishing emails. This one, I think what got the victim in this case was the victim's signature at the bottom. And actually, an email just like that was sent by the victim during COVID times. So when we interviewed the victim said, yeah, I actually wrote something like that in 2020. And that's why I actually clicked on the attachment. But the interesting thing here is that in the whole email at the bottom, which the victim sent, or it was victim's writing, there's no mention of the payment. Yet, because of the signature and because of the way it's personalized, they actually clicked on this payment.html. So, and we asked the victim also, okay, did you see something was odd? And they said, you know what, we receive HTML emails all the time. It's the zip emails that somebody told us not to click on in our cyber awareness training. So they were following the script to some level. All right, so let's go to the demo. The demo is going to actually show how, when they click on payment.html, what happens from that point on. All right, so here's the attachment that they click on. The clever part about this is rather than downloading the main payload through a website, from an external website, the document is actually embedded in this HTML. So on the bottom right, you will actually your left, you will see a document, and then there is a password for the document too. So the level of trust that attackers were able to attain in the phishing email, that makes the victim actually open the document with a password. And actually, password adds a little more legitimacy, right? That, oh, you know what, we're trying to give you a secure document. So let's go ahead and try to open the attachment or open the file that came from the attachment with a password. And inside it, there is an ISO file. So to open that, we need that password of ABC, 1, 2, 3. And when we enter, what you will see is E drive. So ISO got mounted. And just so that attackers don't break the whole social engineering chain, they actually put you right in the E drive. Okay? And then the link, when you click on that, it looks like a folder, but it's a link file. You get, this is what the attackers get. So if I was the attacker, I would get this on my screen, that victim number 3493 has connected, and this is your genie in the shell. So tell me what to do. Yeah, excuse my ASCII for the lamp and the genie, but the rest of it is pretty cool. So then the question is, what do you want to do? We have been successfully able to pawn a victim in an organization that you wanted. So you could do a lot of things. Install remote access app like Splash App, conduct recon, dump credentials, create a reverse tunnel, do a Google Cloud demo, or anything else you want. So it's your genie, right? And you can get anything done there. So a lot of interesting things there to note, especially about the folder icon, right? Because if it was a different folder icon, you might have been a little careful. You got placed on the E drive, so that was interesting. So yeah, the social engineering plus technical element of the attack is the theme there. Okay, so once they have broken into the organization, what happens then? They have to establish a foothold. And what are some of the tactics? We see Cobalt Strike good 70 to 80% of the time. This is the tool of the choice for attackers. The big reason is that they're able to run a lot of modules with Cobalt Strike Beacon and in memory. So they don't even have to place the malware on the system. They can just run it through Beacon. And that's pretty effective for them. Installing the remote access tools like AnyDesk, Splashtop, Screen Connect, TeamViewer. And again, they lie under the radar because the organizations might be using those tools legitimately. So rather than using, say, Cobalt Strike, which the organization doesn't use, I think the more effective technique is figure out what kind of remote access tool the organization is using, and then just use that. So that even if somebody sees Splashtop or Screen Connect, they're like, yeah, we use that in our organization. Establishing a reverse RDP tunnel for interactive access. We're going to talk a little bit through the screenshots about that. There are other things that we see, like Ngrok tunnel, using accounts with MFA exceptions. So this is a very, very important point. Even the organizations that have two-factor authentication, some of the accounts, like service accounts or vendor accounts, they may not be protected by two-factor. So the attackers take advantage of that. And the classic stealing the Active Directory database file, ntds.dit file from domain controller, and then cracking the hashes offline, and then trying this MFA fatigue tactic. Have you ever heard of MFA fatigue tactic? Okay. So a lot of times when we try to put more security, we say, oh, let's make everything two-factor, and then we're golden. But no. That's what makes people live under false sense of security, because two-factor is not that silver bullet. Because what the attackers do is they try the password so many times, and you get the push prompts saying that, hey, is it you? Click yes. And if you hit no, then you keep getting it. So if you're at your child's soccer game or somewhere that you don't want those things, and it's still very silly, but I kid you not, that happens a lot, especially in business email compromise attacks and in ransomware attacks too. So let's actually check what this RDP tunneling is all about. So there's a tool called P-Link. You can download that from Putty's website. And the concept is that if you try to RDP into a host in an internal organization, you probably can't because the firewall will not let you in, right? So what you do is you establish a tunnel over SSH. And one thing that I would say is that in this example, you're seeing port 22 going outbound. Some organizations may not allow port 22 outbound. So what we see, what the attackers do is they establish the tunnel on port 443. Any guesses why? Yeah, 480 and 443, they're allowed by organizations for web browsing. It should only be allowed on like workstations, but some people, some organizations allow it on servers too. Don't know why. So once you have the tunnel established with this syntax of the command, then what you do from the attacker's server, all you have to do is open up the RDP application via MSTSC on start run. And then you just type in your local host address and the port that you identified. So in the command above that, you will see the -r with the port 12345. So whatever that port is, you can connect via remote desktop. And once the attackers have remote desktop kind of like GUI access in the environment, and credentials which are going to come later, sky's the limit. They can do a lot of damage to the organization. Okay. And let's talk about escalating privileges, right? So it's not just enough to have a network channel established with the victim organization, but you also need to have the right credentials to move laterally. You make it to one system, but that's not your end goal. And the likely victim of the email spear phishing attack is probably not an IT person. It's probably some other user who's not well versed with IT and security. So the attackers have to make their way to the more critical systems like domain controllers, database servers, some jump servers. So Mimikatz is a utility that we see a lot. And Mimikatz can do a lot of things. The first use case is reading plain text passwords from memory. And W-digest authentication, if that's enabled, that gives you that plain text password. But if it's not enabled, there's a very simple script that you can run to just enable that. And here, the script you can see in the slide here. Once you have the local admin password on a box, you may luck out that the local admin password could be the same on multiple computers, and also the same on workstations and servers. So if that's the case, not a whole lot to do remaining to do, but that is one thing that they do. So let's actually take a look at some Mimikatz examples, and then we'll come back to the slide to talk about the other 2 points. So here's the evolution of Mimikatz that we've seen in both the ransomware context and nation-state context. We used to see back in the days, oh, actually, not the demo right now. Sorry. Okay, so let's see what we have on the screen here. So we used to see just the attackers just running mimikatz.exe. That's noisy, right? And a lot of people are monitoring for mimikatz.exe. So the next thing that they started trying was running Mimikatz via PowerShell. So there's this invoke Mimikatz module, and they can just run through that. Then they realized, okay, why run the risk of running Mimikatz on a victim box? Because that could get detected. And by this time, I think one important thing to understand is by this time, they've already put a lot of effort in to get into the network and furthering their way into the network. So at this point, if they get booted out, that's a huge loss for them. So they don't want to do that. So one thing that they do is they do a proc dump, a sysinternals utility, which can help with the dumps of processes. So that's what they started doing. But even proc dump started getting flagged by EDR and XDR tools. So they said, okay, what next? So what we see these days is there's a way to dump LSAS memory through this run DLL COM SVCS component. And it's pretty simple. You run that, and you get LSAS dump. And then you can take that LSAS dump to the attacker server and crack or get run Mimikatz on the LSAS dump to get the plain text passwords and other hashes that you want. Okay, so let's go back one slide. I'm just going to talk about cred dump, secrets dump. Some frameworks are there that we see a lot. And then there are some paid tools like Zen Armor. I think Sharp Decrypt is open source, but Zen Armor, if you just Google that really quick and check the features, there's so many. Not only that you get some of the Windows passwords, but you can get the passwords for a lot of the applications that are being used. And the browser passwords are also key, because once you have the browser passwords, guess what you can have? You can have access to the portals. And sometimes those key portals can have additional passwords. So just like incident response is an iterative process, these attackers keep iterating on their existing access, and they keep furthering. And they get lucky a lot of times too. But with these tools, once you have access to one machine, you can do a lot of damage. All right, so let me just show you one other thing about Mimikatz, how the plain text passwords actually look like. So if you see at the bottom half, you will see the plain text password. I mean, you have the hashes too that you can crack, but sometimes you don't even need to do that because the passwords are right there. Okay? All right, so let's move on to the next demo. In this demo, what we're going to talk about is how they do initial reconnaissance. By the way, this is the Atera backend. So this is the attacker's view of the box, which they've pawned. So you remember in the Genie in the Shell example, we had this option to install Atera Splashtop. This is how it looks like on the attacker end. You could do so much damage with this tool, right? File transfers, command prompt, PowerShell. So let's, invoke a command shell. And once you have a command shell, you could do a lot of damage. So The first command, typical, just to kind of see where they're at, what kind of file structure they're in. It's basically the dir command that tells them what's in the C drive. The system info command also gives a lot of information about the box, especially about the domain that they're part of. That's one of the things that they want to know. Who am I command, which context they're running under. Now, if you know security system is very, very high privileges, you could do pretty much anything. And then task list. Task list is very common because they want to know what kind of security software you're running on your system so that they could use their custom scripts to disable that. But LSAS process ID is pretty important because that's what they're going to use later on to dump LSAS memory. So again, when they have this task list, they get to understand what's your security posture of that box, like what kind of tools you're running, and sometimes they will kill it if they think they can't bypass with their tools. So now what is this command? Does anybody know? dir/s. They are taking the list of files that are on this computer from like C drive all the way, throughout the system. It takes about 20, 30 seconds to run, but they get really important information. Because if there are some key files on that system, they will start exfiltration right away. Okay? All right, so let's actually run the demo for the LSAS memory dump. And you probably noticed that we noted the process ID for LSAS earlier. So that's all we need, and then this syntax of the command. Okay, I think the video went out. Okay, I think we could move on. We could stay on the slide. And you saw the screenshot earlier for COM-SVC way of taking LSAS dump, so we won't go too deep in that. If you can end the video and go to the slide. Thank you. All right. All right. So we're going to do one more demo really quickly, and then go talk about what happens once the ransomware attack is detonated. So I talked about exfiltration in the previous slide. So exfiltration, you have to understand there are two kinds of exfiltrations. One is when they're running the reconnaissance tools. They're taking the data to study what's in it. So they might be running some internal scans. They almost every time run the LSAS dump. They need that. So there's some exfiltration going on already. But this exfiltration that we're talking about is more of the data exfiltration. And there's a method to madness here too. We see them use some really organized tools like everything.exe. If you haven't heard of that, there is a website called voidtools.com. You can check it out, check out the screenshot. It's a pretty powerful tool. What it is it indexes the files. And you can do it across the network. So then if you are looking for, say, a BAK file for SQL backup, then you get all of the BAK files in the network. So pretty powerful tool. We almost always see some compression. So attackers do not want to take, if they can compress the data to make the size lower, they would do that because they don't want to raise some alarms if, like say, 10 gigabytes need to be exported. They would compress it to the lowest size before they take the data. Our clone and megasync utilities, again, if you want to put in the notes, we see that a lot in ransomware attacks. Megasync and rclone, because it's basically a sync application rather than them doing the export manually. They just give a path and they say just take everything from that, and 2-3 days later they have all the data. We also see them using smart FTP tools to exfiltrate the data via FTP, SFTP protocol. Pretty basic. Again, once you have that deep access into the network, these things are pretty simple. So the demo that we're going to run is on a custom data uploader tool. Just a little background while the video is coming. It is coded in Go language, and it's a pretty simple tool. You could actually just drag and drop files to it, and it will upload to a SFTP server. So let's play that demo. All right. So one thing that the attackers like to do is they don't like to have their tools right in like downloads folder or desktop folder. they want to have that social engineering element built in throughout. So SVC host, the legitimate location is System32 folder, Windows System32. In this case, they placed it, for this demo purpose, I've placed it in the Windows folder. Now, the difference is you won't see any file version, product name, or product version in this one. But when you go to the System32 folder and check the svchost.exe, which is the real one, you will see the difference. So one way to spot like bad file versus a good file of a known process is simply that. The good one has the digital signatures, it has Microsoft's version number and everything. But let's actually go ahead and see what the options are for SVC host. So again, very, very simple code, only one purpose for that tool. And when you run that, you actually get the configuration of your SFTP server. I know you're probably itching to try that username and password. It may or may not work, but the cool thing about that is that on command line, you can just type in SVC host, the name of the file or the path of the file, and you get there. So this is just an example of showing how easy the exfiltration is with a custom tool like that. And in this one, I'm taking local files, right? But if the attacker's on a network, they can go, whack, file server, marketing, or whatever, and they can take the files that way. So you can drag and drop one file. You can drag and drop multiple files. So once they know what they want to take, it's as simple as this. So if I start my SCP, WinSCP software, and I go to that SCP server, what you will see is that there is a directory, designated directory, where all the files end up. And that's the attacker's end. So exfiltration, back then, you might have heard about DNS tunneling and all of these really crazy ways of exfiltration. It has become that easy for the attackers. OK. So we'll go back to the slide deck, and this last phase of the attack is what we call the completing the mission part, hunting for critical systems and prepping for ransomware deployment. Okay. So one of the tools that we see a lot is a very simple tool, SoftPerfect Network Scanner. Now, in the XML file, the settings file, we always get to see the attackers craft about targeting the systems that they want first. So for example, like they want to get all the web servers, they want to get a list of FTP and SFTP servers. I think they got the port wrong for SFTP, so I think their operator should fire them, the intern at least, who coded this. But database servers, very, very critical, right? And one note about database servers, they actually stop the services on database servers because they actually care that you recover the data the right way. Because if the database is running and they encrypt it, sometimes it doesn't get recovered that well. So again, they target systems like Veeam backups, hypervisor backups, and very, very important systems in the network. And they just create the list. And right in this phase, they also use things like, have you guys heard of AD-Find, Bloodhound, those sort of tools? So they do a lot of Active Directory reconnaissance, because by this time they've run Mimikatz and they've got all the access in the network with good domain admin passwords. So it's very easy for them. Now here's a script that we get to see a lot too, or scripts just like this. They hate your backups. They literally, through their guts, they hate your backups. So the one thing that they want to do, they want to destroy your volume shadow copies. They want to pick every single drive that could have a folder called backup or something that looks like a backup. So these VHD files, what are VHD files? Virtual disk files, right? So they want to get rid of that. And then the next slide, what you'll see is some more scripts. What else do they want to do before actually deploying their encryptors? They want to make sure that their encryptor or the actual ransomware program will not get interrupted by your security software, right? So earlier we saw them stopping, doing task lists to understand what you have. This is the phase where they actually stop it. They have a one-size-fits-all script, which has the latest and the greatest ways of killing all the security tools, even if the organization doesn't have it. That's pretty poor, because you're raising a lot of noise. The good ones, they actually pick what the organization is using. And on the right side, the other screenshot that you have, you will see them detonating the ransomware. And again, their choice of the binary name is also SVC host, but this one is running from C temp folder. Okay? All right, so what happens when they actually when the ransomware detonates? In every folder where the files are encrypted, you would have either a HTML file or a text file with a note like this. They actually brag about being the world's fastest and most stable ransomware since 2019. Not that new, they're relatively new to this. And then they talk about why they won't cheat you. So it's like a business for them. They're kind of making a pitch that, hey, we have compromised you, but trust us, we will return all the data, right? They say the reputation is very, very important to them, and they're not politically motivated, just in case you're thinking there could be any sanctions, right? Lots of interesting things. They say, hey, treat this situation simply as a paid training for your system administrators, and they're making it really, really casual when the organization is already under a lot of stress. And nobody chuckles, by the way, when they're under a ransomware attack, so it's a bad joke at that time. All right, so let's see what's next in the ransomware node. The important thing here is this personal ID. And they talk about this private chat, and this personal ID is basically your key, your unique identifier as a victim. And if you ever need to reach their help desk, this is how you would identify. Just like every good criminal, they actually give a fair warning. Do not go to the police. Do not go to the FBI. And they actually make some claims that nobody has been caught. But yeah, it's a long note. So let's see some more. What are the dangers of leaking your company's data, as if the board or the EMT doesn't know what the risks are. They actually try to educate. And the last one, but not the least, is a threat. In the last line, if you do not pay the ransom, we will attack your company again in future. So one thing I wanted to highlight here is that the attack, even though it's called a ransomware attack, it's a multifaceted attack. There are three things that may compel an organization to pay. Number one, if they want to recover the data, right? So that's the decryption key. That's what people think that's all it's about. The second thing is exfiltration, right? So if your data is lost, and even if you don't care about that data, because when you hire forensic experts and they tell you this data was taken and you say, oh, this is all publicly available data, we don't care. Then this third threat could get to you, because they're saying, okay, if you're not going to pay, we're going to keep attacking you. So important points here in this ransom node. All right, so how do the negotiations look like? But let's just briefly for 10 seconds talk about why you might consider paying them. These are some of the reasons. But let's look at some of the counter demands you can have. And this is the most fascinating thing for me when I'm involved in negotiations, even from a third-party point of view or as an advisor point of view. This point about intrusion report on your right, one time I just threw that in. I was like, let's see what the attackers say. And guess what? For all of these demands, I did not see the answer being other than a yes. So you don't see the questions here or the demands here, but you can kind of infer what the questions might be based on this threat actor communication. And number 8 is that one. And you can almost hear the size of the attacker right here. Okay, we will write the report because you're giving us so much money, right? And the other interesting part is that they want you to divide the payments in like 2, 3, or 4 Bitcoin wallets. Do you know why? Any guesses? So they could be 3 different threat actors involved to conduct that one hack. One could have given credentials, one could have actually made the whole lateral movement and privilege escalation. And there is one that has the highest amount, right? 520. I bet that's the one that's actually communicating, because that person is taking the most risk. because they're communicating there, could be under law enforcement radar. All right, and this is, I mean, I was over-expecting the report, but this is what we got. It's not like a full intrusion report, but they give some security recommendations and whatnot, which is interesting. Some of the things don't make sense, by the way. Like they say, okay, use Screen Connect at AnyDesk or TeamViewer because that's how they got them in the first place. So interesting notes. So some tips from the trenches, and this is where we will end and give you an opportunity to ask some questions. The most important thing, if you ever have to have a ransomware investigation, this is what you want from your incident response team. And it's not just forensic experts, but your external counsel and all the other people internal to the organization as well. You want to keep one fact sheet so that you could prepare the public statements, the customer letters, or a note to internal employees, factually. And you have to understand the priorities. Because there's a lot going on, and if you don't pay attention to the priorities, things could be in different orders, and you might suffer a reputation lost. Okay, so let's talk. Let's take some questions, but before we take questions, I just wanted to share some acknowledgements. First of all, thank you to the whole Mandiant team who enables us, the threat intel and all the other departments. Special shout out to the IR folks at Mandiant, especially the IR folks in my central USA team. Some of them are sitting here. Some of them might be watching. So you guys are incredible. Thank you. And one other thank you to my wife who actually put me on a plan that made me fit in the suit after 2 years of COVID. So that's that. Thank you. I would love to take questions. And if you don't get time to ask questions here, add me on LinkedIn. We're very passionate about this subject, so we would love to answer your questions at other times. But yeah, if there are any questions, we'll take.